So I've been wanting to talk about this for a while. The big cancer plot, or BCP, as I guess it's called, is the conspiracy theory that pharmaceutical companies already have the cure for cancer locked away in a vault somewhere, or that they're suppressing serious research, or something like that. I've been working in the pharmaceutical industry for the last 7 years. I started in research, and then I moved to development, and then for the past few years I've been working as a consultant across several different commercial functions. And it's part of my job to interview and interact with people across the entirety of the healthcare landscape. So I have a pretty decent handle on the general inner workings of the pharmaceutical industry. I remember hearing about the BCP long before I ever picked up a pipette though. I'm pretty sure this is just one of those theories that's just like as old as the internet is, maybe even older. I remember when I walked into my first conference for the American Society of Clinical Oncology, or ASCO, as it's called, the thought of the big cancer plot crossed my mind. Because this place is a 44,000 person meeting, including 37,000 professionals, 6,000 cancer companies, and another few thousand media people, all getting together to talk about their most recent cutting-edge research. And part of my job is to sit and take notes at some of these data presentations. And it wasn't uncommon for doctors and researchers to start their presentations with some kind of personal connection that they have to cancer, like a lost loved one or pure commitment to the work that has come to define their lives. And at one point, I remember looking around and thinking, if this is a conspiracy, then they're doing a great job. The pageantry, the lights, the raw emotion.
These are the two studies establishing the benefit of PARP inhibitors in metastatic germline BRCA mutated breast cancer.
I mean, did I be fooled? You know, like there's got to be a cheaper way to make a lot of money than spending a ton of it on research design to hide the fact that we already have the cure somewhere. But then I left that meeting. And while I think about it from time to time, I've never really researched too much into this topic. But I've always been kind of curious because as far as conspiracy theories go, this one really isn't the craziest. And a lot of incorrect conspiracy theories do have some truth to them, which is part of what often makes them so compelling. The main argument I've heard for the BCP is that Big Pharma doesn't want to cure cancer because the real money isn't in curing a disease, but in treating it. I also heard that the evidence that they were doing this laid in the fact that pharma companies will often buy up smaller biotechs and then shelve their products, which does happen, like when Eli Lilly acquired Armo Biosciences in 2018 or Merck acquired Ringotech in 2017, and the products were allegedly shelved due to primary clinical endpoints being missed. But still, I've been thoroughly compelled. And I wanted to take some time to look into whether there were any other solid arguments that could sway me into further believing in the BCP. And while plenty of other people have talked about this on YouTube, I thought that I had a little bit of a different perspective and wanted to talk about it from my point of view. So I thought I'd toss my hat into this ring. And now that I got that out of the way, let's see if we can find any more solid arguments for the BCP. I decided to start by asking ChatGPT whether pharmaceutical companies shelve products with the potential to cure cancer because it's more profitable to treat cancer. And it replied by saying, the idea that pharmaceutical companies would shelve potential cures for cancer in favor of treatments is a common conspiracy theory, but it's not supported by evidence. While pharmaceutical companies do operate in a profit-driven industry, there are several reasons why this theory is unlikely. Hear that? Unlikely. It's saying there's a chance this is real. I then asked if it knew any places that I might be able to find people talking about the theory, and one of its suggestions was YouTube. Myth. Pharma companies are suppressing the cure for cancer. Wait, are they saying it's a myth, or are they posing it as a question? Fact. Oh. No. Some cancers can be cured, but finding new ones costs money and not everything works first time. So they were just posing a question. Okay, so here's another fact. Yeah, that wasn't really 10 persistent cancer myths debunked so much as one cancer myth with some weak supporting evidence. There you have it. Maybe YouTube isn't as overflowing with conspiracy as ChatGPT thought it might be. Let's take a look at the comments to see some more measured and thoughtful takes on what we just watched. Which drug company would be happy to lose a $40 billion a year national health contract? Oh, 358 likes? That's more than the video. To answer the question, if you cured the cancer permanently, then you won't have them as a patient anymore, but if you just cure them temporarily, then they'll come back for treatments again. There's more money to be made if everyone is sick as opposed to healthy. Pharmaceutical companies are run by banks. Their aim is profit. Sometimes they do help people, but most of the time they simply treat an illness to prolong it and thus make a profit. A weak argument. Treatment versus cure. Which is more lucrative? Someone needs to come out with the truth of the real cure on a worldwide scale, please. Young Rich Lime might have a point here. And honestly, I'm very jealous of these people's inherent intuition. Because while I often have to prove my points by backing them up with evidence, these commenters on YouTube clearly don't. And it's not just on this post, there are others. They're able to simply know a fact without testing any counter-arguments or alternative theories. And it's impressive, but it might be time to see if we could poke any holes in these arguments. Another video I found when doing my search was by the channel Decoding the Unknown, which summarized some of them nicely and gave some good background on the big cancer conspiracy theory. So you should check that video out after this one if you want to learn more. Part of what might proliferate this theory is tangible efficacy behind some natural products like turmeric or eggplant extracts, but that efficacy never holds up in any statistically significant way. But it seems like papaya extract or apricot pits, which can cause cyanide poisoning if you have too much of it, and powdered shark cartilage were mentioned as allegedly having some evidence of reducing angiogenesis of cancer cells. And naturally, people will commercialize these therapies as potentially cancer curing, despite them having little evidence to support their claims. One therapy from the early 2000s that got shut down by 3 governments, called Zotron therapy, promised to cure cancer using magnetic fields if you paid $20,000 up front and then came to their office in Mexico. Another crazy thing he mentions is a study performed by worldwidecancerresearch.org that found a quarter of US citizens definitely believe in the BCP.
One in 4? What?
That 1 out of 7 people think that it might be true. So like 40% of the population believes it. There was also some speculation that this whole theory might be proliferated by people who lost a loved one to cancer and are really just looking for someone to blame, which of course is something that I can be sympathetic to. But a weak argument, denial versus acceptance, which is easier? I'm not saying the pharmaceutical industry hasn't made mistakes or that the healthcare industry in general can't be improved. But at the end of the day, the big cancer plot really doesn't make sense. First of all, as I'm sure many of you know, cancer isn't just one disease, but many. And it generally comes about when a mutation occurs in a cell's DNA that causes it to spread and replicate uncontrollably. As I mentioned in the Decoding the Unknown video, there's about 200 different kinds of cancer. And we actually do essentially know how to cure some of them, like childhood leukemia, for example. And over the past 20 years, there's been a steady 25% decrease in cancer deaths worldwide. So it does seem like we're making progress towards a future where we'll essentially be able to cure cancer. But many cancers have to be addressed in different ways, which is why research can be slow. And also why it's unlikely that there's going to be one big magical cancer cure. But even if that was part of the plan, maybe to make it look like they're making progress to avoid scrutiny, it still wouldn't make sense from a logistical or financial standpoint. They'd realistically need like a few 100,000 people to be in on it, including someone probably like me. Maybe I am in on it. But even if they managed to keep it to a few hundred super secretive people or whatever, find out if the therapy even worked, they'd have to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on clinical trials, tens of thousands of people with all 200 different kinds of cancers, including rare ones, to make sure it actually worked in every kind of cancer. And even if they somehow developed a silver bullet cancer cure without testing it on enough people to be sure, the amount of money you could make from curing every kind of cancer would be so insane. I did a little rough math with some numbers I found online, so feel free to critique me. Pfizer, arguably the biggest pharmaceutical company in the world, makes $58.5 billion in revenue every year, and about a fifth of that is oncology revenue. Their highest selling cancer drug is called Ibrance for HR-positive and HER2-negative breast cancer. It brings in about $4.75 billion in revenue to them per year, about $2.6 billion in profit. According to drugs.com, Ibrance costs $17,000 for a month's supply, which means to a patient, out of pocket, without insurance, it would cost about $204,000 a year to them. A lot of money. There are about 64,000 patients a year treated with this product. That means the total yearly consumer spend on Ibrance, once everybody in the chain has taken their cut, is about $13 billion. But for this particular drug, Pfizer gets to keep about 36% of the revenue. I mention this because while Pfizer treats about 64,000 patients a year for breast cancer just with this one drug, there are 25 million people a year who develop cancer, and growing, not even including people who already have it. And Ibrance has about 86% market share for this kind of therapy. And there are usually other breast cancer treatments that you try before this one, so Ibrance only treats about 5% of new breast cancer patients per year. And surely whichever company was able to develop the cure for cancer would be able to capture a significant portion of the cancer market. Well, let's say for fun that they're able to treat everybody. If they sold it for the same amount as Ibrance, $200,000 a year, which they wouldn't, it would be much more, they would be able to sell $5 trillion worth of medicine without ever having to retreat another person for cancer again. And if Pfizer could keep 36% of that, of course it'd be a little bit different, but for argument's sake, let's say that's what they're able to keep, they would be able to make $1.8 trillion a year in revenue. And even if they only treated 5 million people a year, like 20% of people who get cancer every year, they'd be able to make $1 trillion and still bring home $204 billion. That is 6 times their total current yearly revenue, using pretty conservative numbers and frankly a very cheap cure for cancer. It would realistically probably make them the wealthiest company in the world. Now, I'm sure these numbers are off and there might have been a better example to use, but it's pretty clear they'd make a lot of money, right? On top of that, there's no reason to necessarily believe that the treatment would only have to take a year to complete. And even if it cures a patient's cancer, then who's to say that they won't get a different kind of cancer or contract some other kind of disease that Pfizer would be able to treat with one of their drugs? Ultimately, these companies do profit the most from keeping you alive. And in this scenario, Pfizer would make a lot of money right at first, but then the treatment would come off patent and everybody in the industry would be able to get a piece of the pie. And I'm sure that other creative ways exist to continue making money off of this somehow. So there really isn't much reason to believe that pharmaceutical companies or a cabal of pharmaceutical companies are hiding away the cure in some Fallout-style vault. Topical. But with that, I think I'm going to end it here. I hope you found this topic interesting. If you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe and comment what you think about the big cancer plot. Are you one of the 86 million Americans that believes it's true? If so, what are your arguments? I had a lot of fun researching, but I have a feeling that I really only scratched the surface of how deep this thing can go. And if you're a big pharma CEO that happens to come across this, come out with the truth of the real cure on a worldwide scale, please.